The wind drove the rain like coffin nails. Clara did not feel the cold. Not really. She felt the sharp, glassy bite of shale rock slicing into the soles of her bare feet, and she felt the raw ache in her ribs where the breath would not go deep enough. But the cold was just a distant hum. It was part of the gray, roaring world that had swallowed her whole. She had been running since the first crack of thunder broke over the gulch, or perhaps she had been running for a week. Time had smeared, blurred by the ringing in her ears and the sharp, metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Her dress, a calico that had once been a respectable blue, was torn at the shoulder and ripped from knee to hem, hanging in wet, heavy rags that slapped against her legs. The mud was a cold, greedy soup that sucked at her skin with every step. She was half-starved, a hollow space beneath the bruising, but her arms were locked in a death grip around the bundle. It was a small thing, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth, and she held it against her breastbone as if it were a shield, as if it held the last piece of her that had not been ripped away, back in the dusty, saloon-lit room in the town she could not even name. The mountains were shadows against a bruised purple sky. Every flash of lightning showed her a new, impossible wall of rock, another torrent of water barring the path. She was not running to anywhere. She was only running from... When she saw the light, she thought it was another trick of the lightning, a faint, yellow smear against the dark, too steady to be real. But it did not vanish. It was a window. Hope was a terrible, dangerous thing. It made her legs tremble. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees in the mud, pushing herself back up. It was a cabin, low-set and dark, clinging to the side of the mountain slope. A thin curl of chimney smoke was instantly shredded by the wind. She reached the door, a heavy slab of raw timber, and pounded on it. Her fist was numb, a small, weak sound against the roar of the storm. She pounded again, leaning her forehead against the wet wood, a sob tearing loose from her chest. The door scraped open. He was a wall, a tall, broad-shouldered man filling the entire frame, silhouetted against the firelight within. He smelled of wet wool, wood smoke, and something bitter, like old coffee. Clara tried to speak. "Please," she whispered, but the wind stole the word. The man, Eli, just looked down. His face was bearded, hard-set, his eyes lost in the shadow of his brow. He looked at her bare, bleeding feet. He looked at the torn dress and the dark, blooming bruise on her cheek. He looked at the bundle she clutched. He did not offer a hand. He did not ask her name. She swayed, the last of her strength gone, and pitched forward. He caught her, but not in an embrace. His arm hooked around her waist, a hard, impersonal grip. He dragged her inside, over the threshold, as if she were a sack of feed that had fallen from the wagon. He kicked the door shut with his heel, plunging the room into the dim, flickering warmth of the hearth. Clara collapsed onto the floorboards, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. He stood over her for a long moment. She curled inward, protecting the bundle, bracing for a blow or a curse. Instead, he turned his back on her. He walked to a high shelf and pulled down a heavy, gray wool blanket. It was coarse, and it smelled of horse and distance, but he dropped it onto her without a word. Clara pulled it around her shoulders, the rough fibers scratching her skin, but it was dry. It was the first dry thing she had felt in hours. He moved about the small, one-room cabin with a heavy, deliberate silence. He paid her no more attention than he did the kettle steaming by the fire. He was a man accustomed to being alone, and his solitude was a physical thing, like a second, thicker wall against the storm. He pointed to a stool near the fire. Clara understood. She crawled to it, keeping the blanket tight, and sat huddled, her feet tucked beneath her. The fire stung her frozen skin. He crossed to a dry sink and ladled water into a tin cup, which he set on the floor beside her. Then he took a tin plate, scooped a measure of cold beans from a pot, and added a thick slice of hardtack. He set this down next to the water. Food, dry clothes, fire. He had offered the necessities of survival, but not a single grain of comfort. He asked no questions. His silence was absolute, heavier than the thunder that rattled the roof. Clara ate. She had not realized the depth of her hunger until the first spoonful of beans touched her tongue. She ate like a wolf, her eyes never leaving him, her hand trembling. She drank the water, which was cold and tasted of iron. He, meanwhile, tended to his chores. He pulled off his soaking oilskin coat and hung it from a peg, where it dripped steadily onto the floor. He sat on a low bench and pulled off his boots, his back to her. He checked the action on a long rifle that rested against the wall, his hands moving with an efficient, practiced motion. She was a ghost at his fire, and he refused to see her. Clara watched him, her paranoia a living thing that coiled in her stomach. Every sound made her flinch. The pop of a log in the hearth, the scrape of his boot on the floor, the creak of the cabin's timbers as the wind hammered it. She was a cornered animal. She watched his hands. They were large, calloused, scarred across the knuckles. They looked capable of terrible strength. She had seen what hands like that could do. The man, Eli, finally settled into a high-backed wooden chair opposite the fire. He did not look at her. He stared into the flames, but his gaze seemed to go through them, into something far beyond the small, warm room. He was present, but he was not there. The storm, which had seemed to pause, returned with a new, terrifying violence. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a high, thin sound like something dying. Rain turned to hail, rattling against the single window pane like thrown gravel. Clara knew, with a sinking dread, that she could not go back out. To leave was to die. She had to ask. The shame of it burned hotter than the fire. To be a burden, to be weak, to beg. Her voice was a dry croak. Please. He did not move, did not turn his head. She was not sure he had heard. Please, sir. She tried again, her voice shaking. The storm! I cannot go back out! Eli remained motionless for a long time. The only sound was the fire and the screaming wind. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. Just once. He stood, walked to the darkest, coldest corner of the cabin, and kicked a rolled-up canvas bedroll. It thumped against the log wall. The message was clear. She was permitted to stay, but she would stay over there, far from his own bunk, far from the fire. Clara whispered, "Thank you," but she said it to the floor. She waited until he had settled back into his chair, his focus once more on the fire. She gathered the rough blanket around her, picked up her small, precious bundle, and hurried to the corner. The bedroll was thin, the floor hard and cold, but it was shelter. She lay down, facing the wall, her body coiled tightly, her bundle held fast to her chest. Sleep was impossible. The night was a war. Lightning struck nearby, a deafening crack that seemed to split the world in two, followed by a rumble of thunder so deep it shook the very foundation of the cabin. The tin cup rattled on the floor. Clara cried out, a muffled sound, and pressed her face into the musty canvas. She must have drifted into a broken, terrified sleep, because the nightmares came for her. They came with the flashes of lightning, illuminating the dark corners of her mind. A man's whiskey-sour breath, the scrape of a boot, laughter that sounded like breaking glass, the smell of the brand, that sharp, sizzling odor of her own burning flesh. She thrashed, a low moan escaping her. No, no, stop, please. She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. Her heart was a hammer against her ribs. The cabin was dark. The fire burned down to glowing red embers. Across the room, in the chair, Eli was awake. He had not moved. He sat in the shadows, a dark shape holding a rifle across his lap. He was watching the fire. Not her, but he was utterly, terribly awake. He had been sitting there all night, a silent sentinel. She did not know if he was guarding her or guarding himself from her. He had heard her nightmares. He had heard her plead, and he had done nothing. Clara did not lie back down. She sat, knees to her chest, the wool blanket wrapped around her, and waited for the dawn. She and the silent man kept a separate, shared vigil, listening to the thunder roll away into the distance. When the first weak gray light of morning seeped through the window, the storm had finally broken. The world outside was gray, sodden, and dripping. Clara knew she could not stay. The shame of her presence, the terror of this silent, watchful man, was too much. She had to leave. She pushed herself to her feet, her muscles screaming in protest. The wool blanket fell away. She stood, unsteady, in her torn, muddy dress. Eli was still in his chair, but his head was up. He watched her. She took a step toward the door. A white-hot spike of pain shot from her foot to her knee. She cried out and stumbled, her ankle, swollen and purple from the run, giving way completely. She was going to fall. He was there. He moved faster than she could have believed. One moment he was by the fire. The next, his hand was clamped around her arm, holding her upright. His grip was not gentle. It was firm, impersonal. The same grip he'd used to haul her inside, but it was a man's hand, on her. The terror was absolute. It was visceral. It bypassed thought and went straight to blood and bone. The last time a man had grabbed her arm like that. "Don't touch me!" She shrieked the words, the sound tearing from her throat, raw and wild. It was not a request. It was a command born of pure panic. She tried to claw at him, to twist free, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Get off! Don't touch me!" In her violent struggle, her arms flew wide. The bundle, her last possession, slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the wooden floorboards with a dull thud and a faint, splintering crack. The oilcloth wrapping, tied hastily, fell open. The contents spilled onto the dusty floor. It was not much, a length of delicate, lace-edged wedding veil, and it was stained, not with mud, but with dark, rust-colored spots. Beside the veil lay a small, dark wood music box, its silver hinge twisted and broken. The scream died in Clara's throat. She stared at the items, exposed in the gray morning light, her whole, ruined life, lying there on a stranger's floor. The cabin was deathly quiet. The storm was over. Eli let go of her arm. Clara scrambled, half falling, to retrieve her things, but he was faster. He bent down, his movement stiff, and gathered the items. He looked at the blood on the veil. His face was granite, unreadable. He did not ask. He did not judge. He carefully folded the veil, tucked the broken music box inside it, and wrapped the oilcloth back around them. He held the bundle out to her. His hand was steady. She snatched it from him, clutching it to her chest. Then he turned away from her. He walked back toward the hearth. But he did not walk right. He favored his left leg, a pronounced, painful-looking limp. He reached the fireplace and took hold of a simple, whittled cane that leaned against the stones. He rested his weight on it. He was not just a strong, silent man. He was a wounded one. Clara stood trembling, clutching her secret, her bare feet on the cold floor. He stood with his back to her, leaning on his cane, staring at the dead embers of the fire. The silence between them was a new thing, a heavy, shared space. And from the mountains outside, faint but clear on the cold, wet air, came the sound of a wolf's howl. It was answered by another, closer. The man, Eli, did not turn around. His voice, when it came, was a low, rough rumble, like stones grinding together. "You ain't going nowhere," he said, "not till the path clears." The path did not clear. The wolf howls faded with the weak dawn. but the sky remained a sheet of bruised, gray flannel. The rain did not stop. It simply changed its mind, shifting from a driving roar to a cold, relentless drizzle that promised to last for days. The world beyond the single window was a streaming, blurry watercolor of mud and rock. The cabin, which had been a refuge, became a cage. It was a small, tight space, built for one man and his solitude. Now, it held two. The air grew thick with unspoken things. It was a crucible, pressing their two separate, silent pains together until the air crackled more than the fire. Clara kept to her corner. She was a shadow, her movements small and tight, her back always to the wall. She watched Eli. She watched the way he moved, the heavy, measured rhythm of his limp. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. The sound of his cane on the floorboards was the cabin's only clock. He was a man who lived by duty. He tended the fire, checked the seals on his flour and bean stores, and oiled his rifle, all with a grim, focused economy. He was a man who had built a wall of chores around himself, and he would not look over it. He treated her like a stray. He did not ask her name. He did not ask her where she came in from, or why her feet were cut, or why her cheek was the color of a dying plum. When he spoke, it was in grunts of necessity. "More wood," he would mutter, and limp outside. "Pot's hot," he would say, jerking his chin toward the beans bubbling over the fire. He ate standing up, his back to her, looking out the window. He slept, as far as she could tell, in his chair by the hearth, the rifle across his lap. He had not used his own bunk, a low-built frame with a straw mattress, since she arrived. He had given that dark corner to her. On the second day, the silence became unbearable. Idleness was a poison. When she sat still, the memories came. The smell of whiskey, the sound of tearing cloth, the hot, sharp sting of the poker. She jerked. A small cry caught in her throat. Eli, wiping down his saddle leather, paused. He did not look at her, but his hands stopped. She had to move. She had to do something, or she would shatter. She saw a pile of his shirts in the corner, rough wool and cotton, smelling of sweat and wood smoke. One had a sleeve nearly torn off at the shoulder. Beside it was a small wooden box with a spool of dark thread and a few dulled needles. Her hands were shaking. They were bruised and clumsy, but they knew this work. She picked up the shirt. She threaded the needle. Her tongue caught between her teeth. She began to sew. Her stitches were small, tight, and angry. She sewed with a desperate focus, pouring all the chaos in her mind into the simple, repeating motion. In, out, pull, in, out, pull. From across the room, Eli watched her. He watched her bent head, the fall of her dirty, matted hair. He watched her fierce, broken concentration. He said nothing. When she finished the shirt, she found a pair of his socks, the heels worn thin. She darned them. The next morning, the wood box by the hearth was low. Eli pulled on his oilskin coat, grabbed his axe and his cane, and went out into the drizzle. Clara waited. She counted to 100. Then, she pulled the thin wool blanket he had given her tight around her shoulders and followed. He was at the woodpile, a small stack protected by a leaning slab of pine bark. He swung the axe, his bad legs stiff, his body moving with a pained, awkward grace. The thud of the blade sinking into the pine log was a sharp, clean sound in the wet air. He split around, then another. Clara moved forward, her bare, bandaged feet sinking into the mud. She did not approach him, but went to the split wood. She gathered the pieces, her arms aching, and carried them, one load at a time. Back to the cabin. She stacked them neatly by the hearth. Thud, stack, thud, stack. They worked for an hour, a silent, shared rhythm. He split, she carried. They did not speak, they did not look at one another, but it was the first time they had not been enemies of the same small space. His silent care, when it came, was as rough as his hands. That night, her feet were aching, the mud had seeped through the rags, and the cuts felt hot. She hid the wince as she settled onto her bedroll, but he saw it. He was a man who noticed things. He noticed a shifted trap, a change in the wind, a track in the mud. He had been noticing her, even as he pretended not to. He limped to a tall, rough-hewn chest in the corner. His own. He opened it. The smell of cedar and old tobacco filled the air. He rummaged, his back to her, and pulled out a small, dark tin, a bundle of clean-looking cotton rags, and a bar of lye soap. He did not walk over to her. He did not offer to help. That would be an intimacy, a trespass. Instead, he set the items on the floor near the hearth, along with a kettle of hot water. "See to 'em," he said, his voice a low growl. "They'll fester." Then he turned his back, picked up his rifle, and began the meticulous, pointless task of cleaning a weapon that was already clean. Clara stared at the tin and the soap. She waited until his focus was absolute. She crawled to the fire, poured the hot water into a small basin, and unwrapped the rags from her feet. They were a mess, caked in mud and blood. The soap stung like fire. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. She washed the grit from every cut. Then she opened the tin. It was a dark, thick salve that smelled sharply of pine tar and beeswax. She spread it over the wounds. It was a cold, clean sting. She wrapped her feet in the fresh, dry rags. The relief was so profound, so sudden, that it made her dizzy. The next morning, she woke before him. The fire was dead embers, the cabin cold and gray. She sat up, shivering, and saw him asleep in the chair. His head was slumped to his chest, the rifle still balanced on his knees. His face, in sleep, was not hard. It was just empty. She looked away, feeling like she had spied on him. She rose, intending to build the fire, but her head swam from hunger. She had not eaten since the day before. As if he had felt her gaze, Eli's head snapped up. His eyes were instantly awake, sharp and clear. He was on his feet, cane in hand, before she could move. He stared at her, the moment of vulnerability gone. He built the fire. He put the heavy coffee pot on to boil. When it was done, he poured 2 cups. He drank his black and scalding, standing by the window. He left the other cup on the hearth, near her bedroll. He did not offer it. He just left it there. Clara picked it up. Her hands trembled, warming around the hot tin. The coffee was black, bitter, and strong enough to stand a spoon in. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. The storm held them for 4 days. The cabin became their world. They moved around each other, 2 planets in a small, dark orbit. She mended. He oiled tack. She swept the hearth. He carved a new handle for his skinning knife. On the 4th night, the rain finally stopped. The air outside was cold and quiet. The fire inside seemed, for the first time, to be a comfort rather than just a necessity. Eli was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, mending a leather harness. The firelight played across his face and hands. Clara, mending her own torn dress, watched him. She had been less afraid of him, more curious, since she saw him sleep. Now, in the warm, flickering light, she saw what the gray daylight had hidden. His hands, they were calloused, the knuckles scarred, but the back of his left hand, from the wrist to the fingers, was a map of old pain. The skin was pale, slick, and puckered. It was a burn, a bad one. Her eyes traveled up his arm, where the scar tissue vanished into the sleeve of his wool shirt. She looked at his face. He had turned to check the fire, and the light caught the side of his neck. It was there, too, a long, ropey scar that disappeared up into the thicket of his beard, pulling the skin tight near his ear. He had been burned, badly. He felt her watching, He had been pretending not to see her, but he saw everything. His hands stilled on the leather. He did not look at her, but he knew where her gaze had settled. He stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "Fire," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the cabin like a stone. Clara stopped sewing. "What?" "The scars." He flexed his damaged hand. "From the fire." He did not elaborate. He was a man who hated words. But the silence stretched, and Clara did not fill it. She just waited. This ain't my first cabin," he said, his voice rough. "I built another, down in the valley. Had a spring nearby. Cottonwoods." He spoke of it as if it were a lost country. "It was a good place." He stopped. He pulled a long breath, and it seemed to hurt him. "I had a wife, Sarah." He said the name as if it were a prayer or a curse. "And a boy, little Thomas. He was 2. Clara put her mending down. Her own pain was a dull, distant ache. She was listening. "It was 3 years ago, winter. A blizzard came up from the north. The worst I'd seen. I was out." His voice cracked, and he cleared it, angry at the weakness. "Checking a trap line. Got caught in the whiteout. Took me 6 hours to get back. Should have been 2. He stared at the fire, but he was not seeing it. He was seeing that other fire. I smelled it before I saw it. The roof was gone. The whole sky was red. The snow was hissing." He held up his left hand, the scarred one. "The door was jammed. The heat, or maybe the snow." He shook his head. "I got these pulling at the planks. I tore my hands open on it, but it wouldn't give." His breathing was shallow. "I heard him, just for a second. I heard Sarah call my name." He looked at Clara then, and his eyes were not hollow. They were full. They were full of the fire, the smoke, and the screaming. "I didn't get there in time." He said it as a final judgment, the end of the world. He had failed the one duty that mattered. And this cabin, this limp, this silence, this was his penance. Clara felt a cold sickness in her stomach. It was an empathy so sharp it felt like a blade. She understood his solitude. He was not a man. He was a monument to his own failure. "Eli," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his name. He flinched, as if she had struck him. The sound of his own name in this dead place was a shock. He looked at her, his gaze raw, before the mask slammed back down. He grabbed his cane, pushed himself up with a grunt, and limped to the door. He yanked it open and stood in the doorway, staring out at the dark, dripping trees. He needed the cold air. He needed to be away from her, away from the confession. Clara sat by the fire, her heart a cold knot. She was alone with the ghost of his wife and child. The cabin was different after that. The silence was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people who had seen the other's wounds. He was softer. He left the coffee on the hearth every morning. He made sure she ate. He was still a wall, but it was a wall she understood. His confession worked on her like a key. He had trusted her with his grief, or, if not trusted, he had at least bled in front of her. That night, the air grew heavy again. The clouds, which had broken, were rolling back in. A low, distant rumble vibrated through the floorboards. Thunder. They sat by the fire, Eli oiling his boots, Clara with her hands idle in her lap. "My husband," she said. Her voice was so low, he almost did not hear it. He stopped his work. He did not look at her. He waited. He didn't die," she said. Her voice was brittle. "I wish he had." She pulled her knees to her chest. "He was a good man. I thought a fine name in the town. He liked the bottle, and when he drank, he liked to show his strength." Eli's hands tightened on the boot he was holding. He knew that story. We didn't have money left. He played cards. He lost everything. He lost the house, the horse, everything. She was shaking. He played one last hand, against a man, a freighter, Silas, a man with dead eyes. She stopped, choking on the memory. He didn't have any coin left to wager, so he wagered me. Eli's head came up. He stared at her. "Just for the night," Clara whispered, the shame burning her throat. "To clear the debt, I heard him. I ran. I locked the bedroom door." The thunder rumbled, closer this time. "But he had a key. He and Silas, they broke the door. My husband, he held me down. He said I was his property and I had to pay his debts." She was crying now, silent, hot tears that dripped onto her knees. "I fought. I scratched Silas. I bit him. He got angry. He went to the stove. He picked up the poker. The one for the wood." She was breathing in short, sharp gasps. "My husband held my head. Silas. He said if I was going to be stubborn, I ought to be marked, like stubborn cattle." Clara stood up. Her body was vibrating. She was not in the cabin. She was back in that room, smelling the whiskey, the sweat, the hot iron. "I ain't clean," she whispered, a terrible, final admission. I'm not a woman, not anymore." Before Eli could speak, before she could lose her nerve, she turned her back to him. Her trembling fingers found the collar of her torn dress. She pulled the rough cloth aside, exposing her left shoulder blade to the firelight. It was not a memory, it was a fact, seared into her skin, healed over but still angry, was a crude, ugly mark, a looping symbol, meaningless and horrifying, a brand. "He burned it out of me," she said, her voice dead. I'm just skin and shame. That's all that's left." She waited. She waited for the disgust, for him to recoil, for him to tell her to get out, that he would not have a spoiled, ruined thing in his house. Eli did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He stared at the mark. He had seen fire. He knew what it did to flesh. He looked at the ugly, raised scar on her shoulder, and then he looked down at his own ruined hand. He saw the wound. He did not see the shame. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it was hard as iron. "You're still breathing." She turned, confused, pulling her dress back into place. Her tears had stopped. "What?" "You're here," he said, his gaze finding hers. His eyes were not hollow. They were clear. "You're hurt, but you're breathing." He nodded once, a sharp, definitive motion. "That counts." It was not pity. It was not comfort. It was a statement of fact. Her life, her breath, was a thing of value. They sat in the ringing silence. Her shame, his grief, her brand, his scars. They filled the small cabin, pressing against the walls. And then the storm broke. A crack of thunder. So close and so violent it sounded as if a giant tree had been split in two just outside the door. The cabin shook. The tin cup rattled on the floor. Clara screamed. It was a short, terrified sound, and she clapped her hands over her mouth. She looked at Eli. He was a man of ghosts, a man who had not touched a living soul in 3 years, a man who sat with a rifle, guarding the dead. She felt a desperate, terrible ache, a need to be finished, a need to give away the last thing she had, just to prove it was worthless. If she was only skin and shame, then let it be used. She whispered, "If you need to touch someone." He looked at her, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Touch me," she pleaded, the words torn from her. "I can take it. I'm already ruined. It don't matter. Just, I can take it." She was offering him her body, the way her husband had. It was the only coin she had left. Eli's face hardened. He looked at her, at this broken, branded woman, offering him the ashes of her life. He saw her, not as a temptation, but as a mirror of his own loss. He shook his head, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "I don't want to take anything from you." His refusal hit her harder than a blow. He was not rejecting her because she was unclean. He was rejecting her offer. He was saying that what she offered was not a thing to be taken. He was saying she was wrong. And the dam broke. The sobs that came from her were not the quiet, frightened tears from before. They were a storm, a raw, ragged, ugly wail that had been trapped inside her for years. She folded in on herself, her hands covering her face, and she cried. She cried for the woman she had been, for the brand on her shoulder, for the blood on her wedding veil. She cried for the terror and the cold and the endless aching shame. Across the hearth, Eli sat. He did not move. He did not look away. He did not touch her, did not offer a single word of comfort. He just sat, his scarred hand resting on his cane. And he let her. He watched over her, a silent sentinel, as the thunder shook the cabin and she finally let the pain out. That night, Clara did not return her bedroll to the cold, dark corner by the door. After Eli had cleaned their plates, he settled into his chair by the fire. He picked up the piece of leather he was braiding into a new rein, his scarred hands moving in the dim light. He seemed to brace himself, his shoulders tight, expecting her to retreat. She hesitated. The floorboards were cold under her bandaged feet. The corner was exile. The hearth was the center of the cabin. It was warmth. It was life. It was his space. He had shared his grief. He had not recoiled from her shame. He had sat sentinel as she wept. She picked up the thin canvas bedroll. It was a small, defiant act. Her heart hammered. She took 3 steps, her bare feet silent on the wood, and unrolled it on the hearthstones. It was not far from his chair, just close enough to feel the fire's full heat, close enough that she would no longer be sleeping in the shadows. Eli's hand stopped working the leather. He did not look at her. He stared into the fire, his jaw set. She could feel the tension radiating from him. He was a man who had not let another living soul near his fire in 3 years. She saw the muscles in his forearms bunch, as if he meant to stand, to tell her to move. He did not. He let out a long, slow breath. It sounded like the world settling. Then, his hands, stiffly at first, resumed their work. Pull, braid, tighten. Clara lay down, her back to him, facing the stones of the chimney. She was shaking, but the heat from the fire soaked into her back. A profound comfort. She did not feel alone. She could hear him breathing. It was a slow, rough sound. She could hear the snick of his knife trimming the leather. She could smell the smoke from the fire and the faint, clean scent of the pine tar salve on her feet. She fell asleep, and for the first time since she had run, she did not dream. Their routine, which had been a careful navigation around each other's pain, settled into something new. It was a shared, quiet thing. It was not intimacy, not yet, but it was a partnership born of necessity and sealed in confession. The cabin was no longer a cage. It was a small, shared world. In the mornings, she would wake to find him already gone, checking his traps. The coffee pot would be on the hearth, hot, and beside it, a cup he had left for her. He had, at some point, returned to sleeping in his own bunk. It was a low, sturdy frame he had built into the wall, and she often woke to find the blankets on it empty. He was a man who rose before the sun, as if he were afraid to be caught idle by the daylight. When he returned, his limp more pronounced in the cold morning air, he would bring back a rabbit or a brace of grouse, or nothing at all. He never spoke of his success or failure. He would simply skin and clean his catch outside, his movements economical and precise. Clara, in turn, took over the cabin. She had found a small, worn broom of bundled twigs, and she swept the floor until the wood grain showed. She scrubbed the 2 tin plates in the pot with the sand from the creek bank until they shone. She began to organize. She stacked the wood he brought in. She folded his mended shirts and placed them in the cedar chest, a place she would not have dared to touch a week ago. When she did, her fingers brushed against a small, carved wooden bird, a child's toy. She closed the lid quickly, her heart aching for him. They learned each other by inches, by silences. She learned that the tightness in his jaw meant his leg was paining him more than usual. He learned that when she grew too quiet, her eyes fixed on the fire, she was back in that room, smelling the smoke and the whiskey. He would, at those times, make a sudden, loud noise. He would drop a log into the wood box or scrape his cane deliberately on the floor. It was not a kindness. It was a command. Come back. And she would, blinking, her breath catching, but grateful. Their hands brushed. It was inevitable. He was refilling the kettle from the water barrel, and she was reaching for the same ladle to take a drink. His large, calloused, scarred fingers covered hers for a half-second. The touch was electric. It was like a static spark in the dry winter air. Clara snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. Her heart leaped into her throat. Eli froze. He stared at his own hand, the one that had covered hers, as if it had betrayed him. The scarred skin on the back of it looked pale and tight. He dropped the ladle back into the bucket with a clatter. He started, his voice a low rasp. I'll fetch more. He grabbed the bucket and his cane and fled the cabin, limping heavily into the cold. Clara leaned against the wall, her pulse wild. It was just a touch. It was nothing. But it was the first human contact she had felt in longer than she could remember that was not born of violence or cold necessity. It was an accident, and it had shaken them both to the core. When he returned, the bucket heavy, he did not look at her. He poured the water and moved to the other side of the cabin, busying himself with a broken snowshoe. But the air had changed again. The space between them, once empty, was now filled with a strange, heavy awareness. She began to feel the comfort of being watched over. His gaze, which had once felt like a paranoid, judging thing, was different. When she was outside, splitting kindling with a small hatchet, she would feel his eyes on her from the window. He was not watching to catch her, or to judge her. He was watching to see if she would fall. He was watching for wolves. He was, in his silent, grim way, protecting her. It was a feeling so foreign it made her ache. No one had ever protected her. She had only ever been a thing to be used, or a burden to be endured. One day, she was kneading a stiff, flat dough of flour and water. Her hands were clumsy, her arms weak. He spoke from his chair, his voice making her jump. "You're fighting it." She looked at him, confused. "The dough," he said, nodding. "You're trying to muscle it. Don't fight it. Fold it. Use the heel of your hand. Push, fold, turn. Let your own weight do the work." He did not get up to show her. He just spoke. She tried it. Push, fold, turn. The dough, under her new rhythm, began to yield. It became smooth. It was the first thing he had ever taught her. This fragile piece, this quiet, unnamed thing they were building, was shattered by the sound of a horse's whinny. It was noon, the sky a high, cold blue. Eli was outside, checking the roof seal. Clara was inside, turning his worn-out socks on her hand, darning the heels. The sound was sharp, too close. It was not Eli's horse, which was kept in a small lean-to farther down the slope. Clara's blood turned to ice. A visitor, a stranger. The cabin door flew open. Eli was there, his face a mask of urgency. His eyes were wide. He did not speak. He just pointed, his finger jabbing toward the floor. She understood. In the center of the cabin, under a worn bearskin rug, was a small, square outline, the trapdoor to the root cellar. He had shown it to her once, to fetch potatoes. She did not question him. She ran, her body electrified with a fear so total it was instinct, She threw the rug back. She gripped the metal ring, her fingers fumbling, and pulled the heavy door open. A smell of damp earth and burlap rose to meet her. "Get in!" Eli's voice was a low command. "Stay quiet. Don't come out. Not for nothing." She scrambled down the 3 rough-hewn steps, into the pitch-black 5x5 space. She crouched between a sack of potatoes and a barrel of salted pork. She heard the heavy thud of the door closing above her, then the scrape of the bearskin rug being dragged back into place. She was buried. She pressed her ear to the wooden ceiling of her tomb, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She could hear the floorboards above her creak. She heard a man's voice, loud and cheerful, not Eli's. "Ho! The cabin! Anybody home?" A heavy knock rattled the door. Clara clamped her hand over her mouth, her own breathing deafening in the small, cold space. She heard Eli's heavy, limping footsteps cross the floor, the sound of the door scraping open. "Heidi," the new voice said. It was oily, too friendly. "Name's Peterson, supply trader out of Boulder. Just checking my rounds. Colder than a witch's tit, ain't it?" Clara heard Eli grunt. It was a non-committal sound, neither friendly nor hostile. "Got some good stock," Peterson continued, his voice moving inside the cabin. Clara could hear his boots stomping mud onto the floor. "Got bacon, fresh ground arbuckles, some good Kentucky whiskey. Figured a man alone up here could use a taste." "Don't need whiskey." Eli's voice was flat, dead. "Ah, suit yourself." Peterson sounded undeterred. "Just being neighborly. Mind if I warm myself by your fire a moment? My fingers are about to snap off." There was a long, terrible silence. Clara imagined Eli standing in the doorway, a wall of resentment, blocking the man's path. "Go on," Eli said, his voice clipped. Clara heard the man's heavier tread cross the floor. He must have been standing right on top of the rug, right on top of her. She held her breath until her lungs burned. "That's a good fire," Peterson said. "Mighty cozy you got it here, though I gotta say, Eli, this place is cleaner than I recollect. You take up sweepin'." Clara's heart stopped. "Got nothing else to do," Eli said. Guess that's true." Peterson chuckled. "Man needs a woman for that kind of work, though keeps a place right. You ain't seen nobody up this pass, have you?" "Nobody," Eli said. The word was a chip of ice. "Figured." Peterson's voice lowered, becoming conspiratorial. "Just, we got some trouble down in town. Real trouble. Figured I'd ask around, see if anyone spotted her." Clara felt a cold dread so profound it made her dizzy. Her woman, Peterson said, and she could hear him settling into Eli's chair, the wood creaking in protest. "A real piece of work, by the sound of it. Came in on the stage 2 weeks back, married to a fella named Hobbs. Decent man. Far as I knew, liked his cards. Maybe." Clara pressed her face against the damp earth wall of the cellar. Hobbs. His name was Hobbs. "Anyhow," Peterson went on, "Hobbs gets in a game with Silas Croft. You know Silas? Big fella, runs freight." Eli said nothing. "Well, Hobbs loses bad, and he wagers his wife, this new one, Clara." He said her name. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, a low moan trapped in her throat. "Silas goes to collect," Peterson said, his voice full of saloon gossip relish. "And the little cat, she sticks him." Clara heard a sharp noise. "Eli, he must have moved." "Oh yeah," Peterson said. "Stuck him good, right in the gut. Took a pair of sewing shears to him. Bled something awful. Silas ain't dead, but the doc says he ain't never gonna be right. He'll be spoiled for the rest of his days." "That's so," Eli said. It was not a question. "Yep, and she just vanished. Took off into the storm that night. Most folks figure she's dead, frozen in a gulch somewhere. But the sheriff, He put a $20 bounty on her. Assault with intent, that's a hanging offense. You know. Yeah, $20. So I been asking. She's, well, the description ain't much. Young, dark hair, bruised up, most like Hobbs. He weren't gentle, and she was seen carrying some kind of bundle. A silence. Clara could hear the hiss of the fire. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears. Eli knew. He knew about the bundle. He had seen the veil. So, Peterson said, his voice brightening as he clearly stood up. You ain't seen nobody like that. Bruised girl, dark hair, running scared. This was it. Her life hung on the next words from a man who had not spoken more than 20 words to her at a time. A man who lived by a rigid, silent code. A man who had lost everything and owed the world nothing. Clara prayed. She did not know who to, but she prayed. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. Been alone, Eli said. His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. For 3 weeks. Ain't seen no one but you. And I'd be obliged if I stopped seeing you, too. I ain't buying. The lie was so total, so flat, that it was perfect. Well, hell. Peterson chuckled, though it sounded forced. A man's got a right to his solitude. Can't blame you for that. Just trying to make $1. And 20's 20. Clara heard his boots move toward the door. You see her, though? Peterson said, his voice hardening. You'd be smart to tie her up and bring her in. Assaulting a man like Silas. Folks don't take kindly to that. Don't matter what the cause. I'll remember, Eli said. You do that. The door scraped open. A rush of cold air. The door scraped shut. The bar dropped into place with a heavy, final thud. Clara stayed in the dark. She did not move. She was trembling so hard she was afraid the potato sacks would rattle. She heard Eli's footsteps. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. He crossed the cabin. He stopped. He was standing on the rug, right above her. She waited. The floorboards creaked. He was not moving. He was just standing there. Then the rug was pulled back. The trapdoor was yanked open. Gray light flooded the cellar. Eli's shape was a dark silhouette, blocking the square of light. He looked down at her. His face was a shadow. He's gone, he said. Clara tried to climb the steps, but her legs were cramped and weak. They would not hold her. He reached down, not with one hand, with two. He clamped his hands under her arms and hauled her up, out of the dark, as he had hauled her out of the storm. He set her on her feet, but she was unsteady. She stumbled against him. She was pressed against his chest for a second. He was solid, warm. He smelled of wood smoke and the cold, clean air. He did not push her away. He did not hold her. He just let her stand there, his hands on her arms, until her legs stopped shaking. Then he let go and stepped back. The silence in the cabin was heavy. It was full of the trader's voice, the bounty, the lie. Eli turned his back to her. He limped to the hearth and poked the fire. The logs hissed. Clara stood in the middle of the room, her clothes smelling of damp earth. He had lied for her. He had committed a crime for her. He had risked himself for her, a ruined, broken thing. It's true, she whispered. His shoulders tensed, but he did not turn. What he said, she clarified, her voice gaining a strange, brittle strength. It's true. I'm the one he's looking for. Eli kept his back to her. I figured. His name was Silas, the man my husband gave me to. She was speaking to his back, to the fire. It was easier. He tore my dress, and he had the poker from the fire. She touched her shoulder, where the brand was. He held it up. He was laughing, and he said he was going to mark me, so everyone would know what I was. She was breathing fast, the memory hot and sharp. I saw the sewing shears on the table, the ones I was mending my dress with, and I grabbed them. When he lunged at me, I put them out." She held her own hand up, staring at it. "I stabbed him," she said, the words flat and dead. "I did. I felt it. It went in. He screamed, and he dropped the poker. There was so much blood. He fell. My husband, he just stared. He looked afraid of me. I ran. I grabbed my veil, my music box, the only things that were mine. And I ran. I just ran." She let her hand fall. I didn't mean to nearly kill him. I wanted him to stop." She looked at Eli's rigid back. "I deserve to hang," she muttered, the full weight of the trader's words sinking in. A hanging offense. He was right. I deserve worse. I'm You deserve to get out? Eli's voice cut through her self-hatred like a clean, sharp axe. He turned, his face hard, his eyes burning with a cold fire she had never seen. "I don't care what he said," Eli stated, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what your husband did or what that freighter wanted." He took a limping step toward her. "He held a hot iron to you. He was gonna mark you like an animal." He gestured, his scarred hand open. To her. "You're here. You're alive. That's all the justice there is in these mountains." He looked at her, his gaze pinning her. "You deserve to get out. That's what matters." He had not just lied for her. He believed in her. He believed her life was worth more than Silas's. He believed her survival was the only law that mattered. Clara stared at him, a new, strange, painful hope blooming in her chest. That night, the weather turned again, the brief peace of the cold. Blue sky was a trick. The wind rose, a low, mournful moan that built into a roar. The clouds swallowed the mountains. Thunder. It began as a low rumble, miles away, the same rumble that had been the soundtrack to her grief. But this storm was faster, more violent. By the time darkness fell, the cabin was under siege. Rain hammered the roof, wind shrieked at the chimney, and the thunder. It was not a rumble. It was a physical blow, a cannonade that shook the floorboards and rattled the tin cups on the shelf. Clara was not by the fire. She was in her corner, the old corner, by the door. She had retreated, her bedroll pulled tight. She was crouched, her knees to her chest, her hands over her ears. Every crack of lightning, every explosion of thunder, was the sound of the door breaking. It was the sound of Silas laughing. It was the sound of the poker hitting the coals. Eli sat in his chair, the rifle across his lap. He watched her. He watched her curl tighter and tighter, her body trembling. He watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs. He said nothing. He just watched. Another crack, so close, so loud. The whole cabin lit up in a stark, blue-white flash. It sounded as if the sky had torn in half. Clara screamed, a raw animal sound of pure terror. She could not stay there. She could not be alone. She scrambled to her feet, her bedroll falling away. She was not thinking. She was pure, panicked instinct. She ran. She ran the 6 feet across the cabin, to his bunk. He was not in it. He was in his chair. But the bunk was his. It smelled of him. She climbed in, pulling his heavy wool blankets over her, and buried her face in his straw-ticked pillow. It was not enough. She looked at him, a dark, silent shape in the chair, illuminated by the dying fire. "Eli," she whimpered. He was on his feet, his limp, heavy cane in hand. He thought she was in danger. He was moving toward the door. "No," she cried. "Stay, please." He stopped, confused. He stood in the middle of the room. Another crash of thunder. She could not bear it. She threw the blankets back and launched herself from the bunk. She ran to him, grabbing the front of his rough wool shirt in her fists. "Take all of me," she cried, pressing her face into his chest. He was stiff, a wall of muscle and confusion. He did not move. "Take all of me, even the pain. I don't care. Just don't make me be alone. Please." She was offering it again. Her body, her shame. She was offering to be his, to be used. If it meant he would stay. If it meant he would anchor her in the storm. Eli stood rigid. He could feel her trembling. Her small, cold body pressed against his. He could smell the soap on her skin. And the fear. He remembered her offer by the fire. "I can take it." He looked down at the top of her head. Her dark hair tangled against his chest. He felt a surge of something. Not lust. It was a fierce, terrible protectiveness. It was a deep, aching sadness. He remembered his wife. He remembered holding her. He remembered the fire. And he knew what Clara was asking. And he knew what she needed. He did not move. He let her tremble. He let her cry into his shirt. Then, his voice, so quiet it was barely a whisper against the roar of the rain. "You don't have to give yourself away to be held." Clara froze. She stopped crying, her breath catching. She looked up at him. His face was in shadow, but she could see the glint of his eyes. Slowly, his arms came up. One hand, the scarred one, settled on her back. The other cupped the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. It was not a lover's embrace. It was not a violent grip. It was a hold. He pulled her gently, firmly, into his arms. He held her against his chest, tucking her head under his chin. He was so tall, so solid. He was a rock in the middle of the storm. He just held her. Clara's body went limp, a sob. This one of pure, unadulterated relief broke from her. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt, and she held on. He was warm. He was real. He was breathing. Eli stood in the middle of his cabin, holding this broken, terrified woman. He listened to the thunder roar outside. He felt her heart hammering against his ribs. And he realized he was holding someone again. He had not held a living soul since the morning of the fire. He had not let himself touch or be touched. His hands, he felt, were only for building walls, cleaning rifles, and remembering his failure. Now, they were holding Clara. They stood like that for a long time. As the storm raged, he did not let go. She did not pull away. They just stood, two broken souls, entangled not in lust, but in a desperate, profound, and silent need for safety. Eventually, her trembling subsided. Her breathing deepened. She was asleep, on her feet, still clutching his shirt. He did not wake her. With a careful, stiff movement, he bent, hooked one arm under her knees, and lifted her. She was light, like a child. He carried her the few steps to his bunk. He laid her down and pulled the heavy blankets up to her chin. She did not stir. He stood looking at her for a long moment. Then he went back to his chair. He sat, put the rifle across his lap, and stared at the fire. But this time, he was not guarding against the past. He was guarding her. The next morning, Eli woke in his chair to a new smell. It was not the usual smell of old coffee and wood smoke. It was the smell of bacon frying and biscuits. He sat up, his back stiff. Clara was at the hearth. She was wearing one of his own shirts. It was far too large for her. The sleeves rolled up a dozen times. Her hair was combed, tied back with a scrap of twine. Her feet were bandaged and clean. She was using his skillet, and she had a small, makeshift board where she had rolled out biscuit dough. She had found his supplies. She had taken over his kitchen. She looked up as he moved. Her face was pale. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow. She looked shy, afraid, but she did not look broken. She nodded to the fire. I made breakfast." The sun broke through. After nearly 2 weeks of a world defined by gray skies, streaming rain, and the close, smoky smell of the cabin, the morning was a sudden, sharp shock. A high, cold, blue sky stretched over the mountains. The sound of the world was no longer the roar of the storm, but the steady, frantic dripping of a million points of thaw. The path down the mountain, once a waterfall, was now just a river of mud. But it was a path. It was open. Clara stood at the open cabin door, her arms wrapped around herself. The air was so clean it stung her lungs. It smelled of pine, wet earth, and distance. It smelled of freedom, and it smelled of endings. Behind her, Eli dropped a log into the fire. The sound was a punctuation. Their time was over. She had made breakfast, just as she had the morning before. Bacon, biscuits, coffee. They had eaten in their new, shared silence. It was not the hostile silence of her arrival, nor the grieving silence of their confessions. It was a careful, fragile silence, like walking on thin ice. They both knew what the clean sky meant. "You can't stay," he said. It was not a command. It was a fact. "I know." She did not turn from the door. That traitor, Peterson. He'll be back. He'll find out you lied. He'll know. I don't care about him. His voice was a low growl. But he's right about one thing. They'll be looking. They won't stop. I have to go, she whispered. I can't hide forever. I can't make you a liar. Eli, you've done too much. She turned to face him. He was standing by the hearth, his weight on his good leg, his scarred hand resting on the mantel. He was a pillar of solitude, and she had cracked him open. She felt a terrible, aching guilt for it. I'll ride with you, he said, his eyes on the fire. Ride into town. I'll talk to the sheriff. I'll tell him what I saw. The brand, the cuts. I'll make him understand. He was offering to stand with her, to put his name, his quiet, isolated life, on the line for her. The generosity of it, from a man who had nothing left to give, was a blow. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp. She shook her head. No. He looked at her, his brows drawing together. Clara. No, she said, her voice stronger. You lied for me. You hid me. You held me. Her voice broke on the last word. That's enough. That's more than anyone. This is my account. What I did, I have to be the one to settle it, not you. He started to speak, to argue, but she saw the resolve in his face falter. He was a man who understood duty. He saw that this, for her, was the same. It was the only way she could reclaim the piece of herself she'd lost. He gave a single sharp nod. She moved through the cabin, a place that had become more of a home than any she had ever known. She had washed her own torn, mended dress in the stream, and it was dry. She changed out of his large, warm shirt, folding it with a strange reverence. She folded the blankets on his bunk, the ones she had cried into. She gathered her one, small, wrapped bundle, the blood-stained veil, the broken music box. She was ready. She walked to the door, where he stood waiting. He had his oilskin coat on. He held out a small cloth sack. Beans, he said, and hardtack, and some jerky. It's a long walk. She took it. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither of them pulled away. Thank you, Eli, she whispered. He just stared at her, his face a mask of granite. His eyes were dark, full of things he would never say, full of fires and storms, and a grief so deep it had no bottom. She could not leave like this. She could not just walk away. On impulse, driven by a wild, sudden need to give him something, to leave a mark of her own. She stood on her toes. Her hand went to his rough, bearded cheek. He flinched, but did not pull back. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a lover's kiss. It was not the kiss she had dreamed of as a girl. It was desperate, chaste, and fast. It was a kiss of gratitude, of shared pain, of a terrible, unspoken goodbye. It was the taste of salt and smoke and sorrow. She pulled back. His eyes were wide, shocked. He had not been touched like that. She knew. In 3 years. Before he could speak, before he could move, she turned. Goodbye, Eli. She stepped off the porch, her mended boots sinking into the mud, and she walked away. She did not look back. Eli stood on the porch, his hand raised, touching the place where her lips had been. His fingers were trembling. He watched her. He watched her small, determined figure navigate the treacherous, thawing path. He watched her until she was just a speck of blue calico against the gray rock. He watched her until she disappeared around the first bend. And then he let her go. The walk took 2 days. She slept one night under a high pine overhang, huddled in the wool blanket he had insisted she take, eating his dry beans and jerky. The world was loud with melting snow and bird song. It felt wrong. It felt like the world was celebrating her march to the gallows. When she saw the town, it was a shock. It was just a muddy street carved into the valley floor, lined with a dozen false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a livery, a blacksmith. Smoke rose from every chimney. It was a place of life, and she was walking into it to face a sentence of death. She walked down the middle of the street. Her dress was muddy to the knees. Her hair was a wild tangle. She clutched her bundle to her chest. A man rolling a barrel onto a wagon stopped and stared. A woman sweeping the boardwalk of the general store paused, her broom still. Clara kept walking, looking for the sheriff's office. "That's her." The voice was thin, reedy, and she knew it. It was Hobbs, her husband. He was standing outside the saloon, his clothes rumpled, his face unshaven. He pointed at her, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and righteous anger. "That's her!" he shouted, louder. "That's Clara. She's the one who stabbed Silas." The street, which had been quiet, came alive. Men poured out of the saloon. The woman with the broom dropped it. A man with a silver star on his waistcoat pushed through the small crowd. He was older, with a weary, drooping mustache and eyes that had seen too much. He stopped in front of her. "Ma'am." "I'm Clara Hobbs," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'm the one you're looking for." The sheriff, a man named Josiah Bell, let out a long sigh. He looked at the crowd, then back at her. He had the decency to look tired, not triumphant. "Well, ma'am, I reckon you know I have to arrest you for the assault of Silas Croft." He took her arm gently. "Come with me." He led her to the small, log-built jail, which was just one room with a desk and 2 cells in the back. The whispers of the crowd followed her. "Stuck him good. Wildcat. Oughta hang her." He put her in one of the cells. He did not lock the iron-barred door. Not at first. "Silas?" she asked, her voice a croak. The sheriff sat down at his desk, his back to her. "He's alive. Mrs. Hobbs, if you call it that." He ran a hand over his face. "The doctor, well, the wound was bad. It got infected. He'll live, but he won't ever walk right again. And something about the fever. He can't talk, not so's you can understand." He turned to look at her. "He's crippled. Ma'am, permanently. The circuit judge is due in a week. You'll have to stand trial. And I ain't gonna lie, it's serious." He stood up, walked to the cell, and with a heavy, final scrape, he slid the bolt shut. The days in the cell were a blur of gray light and fear. The town was divided, and she heard it all through the thin walls of the jail. She heard the men in the saloon, their voices loud and angry. "A woman attacks a man like that. What's the world coming to? Hobbs had a right. She was his property. $20 says she swings before the snow flies." They saw her as a disruption, a dangerous, unnatural thing that had upset the order of their world. Hobbs was a fool, maybe, but Silas was a man, and she was just a woman. But then there were the others. The whispers of the women were quieter, but they were there. On the third day, the sheriff's wife, a stern, round woman named Martha, brought her food. It was not jail slop. It was a thick stew and a piece of warm bread. "You eat this, child," she said, sliding the plate through the bars. She did not meet Clara's eyes. "A body needs strength." "Thank you, ma'am." Martha paused. "I knew Hobbs's first wife. She fell down the stairs. Twice." The woman looked at Clara then, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You eat." Later, a young woman from the church, Mary, walked past the cell window. It was set high, but she could see Clara's shape inside. "Mrs. Hobbs?" she whispered. Clara moved to the bars. I wanted you to have this." The woman pushed a thick woolen shawl through the bars. It was soft, and it smelled of lavender. It's getting cold in there." I can't. Please," the young woman whispered, her eyes full of a strange, fierce pity. We all knew what kind of man Silas Croft was, what he did to the girls who worked at the saloon. We all knew, we just never said." She touched Clara's fingers through the bars. "You're not as alone as you think." But she was alone when the judge arrived. She was alone when they read the charges. She was alone when they set the trial for the next morning. She sat on the thin cot, clutching the shawl, her small bundle in her lap. She was ready. She had done what she had to do. She had not implicated Eli. She would take her punishment. She would, at least, die with her head held high. The thud and scrape on the boardwalk outside the jail was so familiar it stopped her heart. She stood up, her hands gripping the bars. The door opened. Sheriff Bell looked up, surprised. Eli filled the doorway. He was a nightmare from the mountains. His face was covered in a week's worth underscore of beard. His eyes were red-rimmed from the cold and the long ride. His oilskin coat was caked in mud. He leaned heavily on his cane, his bad leg stiff and trembling from the strain. He looked wild. He looked magnificent. "Eli," she breathed. I come to see the prisoner," he growled at the sheriff. Sheriff Bell, who knew a dangerous man when he saw one, and who also knew a man in profound pain, just nodded. "5 minutes, Mr. Eli limped to her cell. They stood, separated by the iron. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her hands gripping the bars. "Eli, you'll be seen. That traitor." "I don't care about the traitor," he said, his voice a low rasp. The ride had torn him apart. "You have to go," she pleaded, the tears she had refused to shed for herself now streaming down her face. "Please, they'll say you helped me. They'll arrest you, too. You lied for me. Please, Eli, you helped me enough. You did enough. Don't let them take you, too." "I ain't leaving," he said. "Why?" she cried. "Why did you come?" "They're holding a trial, ain't they?" he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Reckon they'll need witnesses." "I'm not a witness, Eli. I'm the one who did it. I'm testifying." He said it was not a discussion. It was a fact, as solid as the mountains he'd come from. "I'm telling him what I saw." "Eli, no." "Clara," he said, and his scarred hand, shaking with exhaustion, came up and covered her fingers on the iron bar. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was steady. "I'm telling him." The trial was held in the saloon. They had cleared the tables and set up benches. The place was packed, hot, and smelled of stale whiskey, wet wool, and nervous sweat. Clara sat in a chair beside a public defender, a young, nervous man from Denver who had barely spoken to her. The judge was a man named Harrison, with a face like iron and eyes that missed nothing. The jury was 12 men, ranchers, the blacksmith, the general store owner. They looked grim. They looked like they wanted this over with so they could get back to their lives. The prosecutor laid out the case. It was simple. A woman, Clara Hobbs, had, with malice and forethought, stabbed an unarmed man, Silas Croft, with a pair of sewing shears. The doctor testified. A grievous wound, Your Honor, near fatal. He is permanently diminished. Then they called her husband. Hobbs was clean-shaven, his hair slicked down. He looked respectable, and he lied. I just lost a hand of cards, he said, twisting his hat in his hands. A misunderstanding. I told her we had to be obliging to Mr. Croft, and she just went wild. She flew at him. I tried to stop her. She was hysterical. She stabbed him. For nothing. A low murmur went through the room. Clara felt the noose tighten. The defense calls, Eli, her young lawyer said, his voice cracking. All eyes turned to the back. Eli rose. He walked down the center aisle. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. The sound was deafening in the packed, silent room. He looked even more out of place here than he had at the jail. A creature of pine and rock, forced into a cage of sawn wood and whiskey stains. He was sworn in. He did not sit. He stood, leaning on his cane, his eyes fixed on the judge. The prosecutor, a slick man in a string tie, smiled. Mr. Forgive me, I don't have a last name. Don't need one, Eli said. Very well, Mr. Eli. You live up on the mountain. You were not, in fact, present during the misunderstanding, were you? No, Eli's voice rumbled. So you saw nothing of the assault? No. Then I fail to see what you are doing here. You have no testimony. I saw her, Eli said, his voice cutting through the prosecutor's smirk. The room went silent. I saw her after, Eli continued, turning his gaze on the jury. She come to my door. In the middle of that storm, the one that nearly took the roof off my cabin, she come, barefoot. He paused, letting the word land. Her feet were cut to ribbons, bleedin'. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn. She was half-starved, and she was terrified, like a deer that's been run by wolves for a week, like an animal that knows it's about to die. Clara watched him, her heart in her throat. She had bruises, Eli said, his voice dropping, but it seemed to get louder. On her face, on her arms, on her ribs. I seen men get thrown from a horse look better. This wasn't from running in the woods. This was from a man's fist. Hobbs, in the front row, sank lower in his seat. And she had this, Eli said. He took a step closer to the jury box, leaning on his cane. Objection, the prosecutor snapped. Relevance? It's the whole damn thing, Eli growled, ignoring him, his eyes burning into the jury. She had a mark on her shoulder. Your Honor. Let him speak, Judge Harrison said, his voice quiet. It was a brand, Eli said, and the word hung in the hot, stale air. Like you put on a steer, a fresh one, burned right into her. They were gonna mark her, spoil her, brand her like cattle, because she was property. A woman in the back, Martha, the sheriff's wife, let out a strangled gasp. You sit here, Eli said, his voice raw, and you talk about justice. You talk about laws. He pointed his scarred, burned hand at Clara. That woman ran barefoot into a blizzard. She ran from a man who beat her, from another who was heating an iron to brand her like she wasn't human. She ran, and she lived. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the prosecutor, the judge, and every man on that jury. If there's any justice out here, he said, his voice a low, powerful force that shook the entire room. "It's her still breathing." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not a courtroom. It was a tomb. Men stared. Hobbs was as white as a sheet. The prosecutor's mouth was open. Judge Harrison stared at Eli for a long time. Then he turned to the jury. "You've heard the testimony," he said, his voice hard. "Go!" The 12 men filed out, their faces pale and shaken. They did not look at Clara. They did not look at Hobbs. The clock on the wall ticked, tick-tock. Clara sat, trembling, her hands clasped across the room. Eli had not returned to his seat. He stood by the back wall, his arms crossed, his cane in his hand. He was watching her. He was standing guard. An hour passed. The sun moved across the dusty floor. 2 hours. A man coughed. The sound was like a gunshot. 3 hours. 4. The jury room door opened. The 12 men filed back into the saloon. Their faces were gray with exhaustion and the weight of the decision. They did not look at Clara. They did not look at Hobbs. They looked at the floor, at their own boots, at the judge. The foreman, a rancher with hands the size of shovels, stood up. The entire room, packed to the walls with smoke, sweat, and judgment, held its breath. "Mr. Foreman," Judge Harrison said, his voice a flat, hard thing. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." Clara sat, her hands laced so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She felt a strange, cold calm. She had told her truth, or rather, Eli had told it for her. What came next was just weather. "On the charge of assault with intent," the foreman read, his voice heavy. "How do you find?" Clara closed her eyes. "We find the defendant, Clara Hobbs, not guilty." The words dropped into the saloon, and the silence that followed was not a celebration. It was a shock. A sharp, collective intake of breath came from the women in the back. A low, angry rumble started with the men near the bar, a sound like distant thunder. Hobbs, her husband, looked as if he had been slapped. The prosecutor slammed his notebook shut with a sharp crack. Clara did not cry. She did not smile. She felt the tension, the thing that had held her body rigid for weeks, for months. Just release. She slumped in the chair, a puppet with its strings cut. From the back of the room, she heard nothing. She opened her eyes and looked. Eli had not moved. He stood against the wall, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had heard. He just nodded. Once, a short, sharp motion, as if confirming a fact he already knew. "Silence!" Judge Harrison's gavel cracked down. Cutting through the rising swell of voices, the room quieted, but the anger remained, thick and sour. The judge fixed his eyes on Clara. He did not look pleased. "Mrs. Hobbs, stand up." Clara pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaking. "This jury," the judge said, his voice cold, "has seen fit to absolve you of this crime. They have made a decision based on mitigating circumstances, on testimony of a prior grievance." He glanced at Eli, then back to Clara. "But this court is not blind, ma'am. This town is not a wilderness. There are laws. Silas Croft is a permanently injured man. He may have been intemperate, but he did not deserve the fate he received." Clara stared at him, her new, fragile calm beginning to crack. "The jury's verdict stands," he continued. "But the sentiment in this town is dangerously divided. I see it in this room. Your presence is a disruption." He leaned forward. "For your own safety, Mrs. Hobbs, and for the preservation of the peace in this community, I am ordering you to be outside of this town's limits within 2 days, 48 hours. I want you gone. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered. This court is adjourned. The gavel cracked again. It was over. The room exploded into motion. Men stood, shoving benches back. Their anger was palpable. They filed out, a river of denim and wool, and as they passed her, their glares were hot. They were not just angry at the verdict. They were angry at her. She was a woman who had broken the rules, who had harmed a man, their man, and who had, by some trick, gotten away with it. She had upset the order of things, and they would not forgive her for it. Other men, the blacksmith, the quiet store owner who had served on the jury, simply looked away. They could not meet her eyes, nor could they meet the glares of their neighbors. They walked out, their faces troubled, their silence a heavy, useless thing. The women were different. Martha, the sheriff's wife, walked past and gave Clara a single, curt nod. It was a nod of approval. Mary, the young woman who had given her the shawl, offered a small, watery smile of relief before her husband hustled her out the door. Clara was left alone at the table. Her young lawyer was already gone, relieved to be done with her. The saloon emptied. The sounds of argument and disgust spilled out onto the muddy street. Thud! Scrape! Thud! Scrape! Eli limped toward her. He did not say, "Are you all right?" He did not say, "I told you so." He just stopped at her table, his shadow falling over her. He was a mountain of quiet, grim satisfaction. "Sheriff's letting you out," he said. Sheriff Bell came over, his hat in his hands. He looked tired. "She's free to go. The judge. He ain't wrong, ma'am. This is not a popular decision. You'd best find a place to stay tonight, and be gone by sunup the day after. You got anywhere to go?" Clara looked at Eli. He looked at the sheriff. The general store," the store owner said, having lingered by the door. "Mr. Peterson, he said she could use the spare room above the store, just till morning. It's the decent thing." "Good," the sheriff said, clearly relieved. "You go there, ma'am, and you stay inside. You hear me? Stay inside and be gone in the morning." The room above the store was small, cold, and smelled of dust and dried mice. A narrow cot, a chair, and a washstand with a cracked basin. It was not a jail cell, but it felt like one. Eli had walked her there. He had not spoken. He had just been there, a silent, limping guard. "Eli," she said at the door, "thank you for what you said." He just nodded. "You stay here. Bolt the door. I'll be back in the morning. I'll ride out with you. See you clear of the valley." He left. She bolted the door. She sat on the cot. She was not guilty. She was free, but she had never felt more alone or more hunted. She took out her bundle, the blood-stained veil, the broken music box. She sat, holding the small wooden box, her fingers tracing the broken hinge. She was free, but she was still a broken thing. Night fell. The sounds from the saloon across the street grew louder, uglier. They were drinking. She could hear her name, spat out like a curse. "That Hobbs woman. Got away with it. Stabbing a man. Ought to have strung her up." The voices were a raw, open wound. She pulled the thin blanket from the cot, wrapped it around herself, and moved to the darkest corner of the room, away from the window. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, clutching the music box to her chest. She pulled her knees up, making herself small. It happened near midnight. A roar of drunk voices from the street. "There! That's the window! Get out, you witch! Get out of our town!" A sound like a gunshot, but it was not a gun. It was glass. The window exploded inward. A shower of sharp, moonlit fragments sprayed across the floor. A rock, the size of a man's fist, thudded onto the floorboards and rolled, coming to a stop near her feet. Outside, there was laughter, a cruel, sharp sound. That's for Silas, you—" Clara did not scream. She could not. The breath was stolen from her lungs. She curled in on herself, a small, tight knot of terror, her head down, her hands clamped over her ears. She was right back where she had started, in the dark, alone, while the world tried to tear her apart. The door to her room crashed open. It burst off the latch, the wood splintering. Clara flinched, a small, animal cry tearing from her throat. She looked up, expecting to see them. The drunks, Hobbs, Silas, come back from the dead. It was Eli. He filled the doorway, a dark, terrible shape against the hallway's dim light. He had his cane in one hand and his rifle in the other. He had not gone back to the mountain. He had been watching. He took in the scene in one burning glance. The shattered window, the cold air, the rock on the floor, and her, curled in the corner, a picture of ultimate, broken defeat. His face, in the moonlight from the broken window, was a mask of such pure, cold rage that it frightened her more than the men outside. It was not a hot anger. It was a killing anger. It was not directed at her. It was directed at the rock, at the town. He limped toward her. His rifle was steady. "They hurt you?" His voice was a low, dangerous growl. She could only shake her head, her body trembling so violently she could not form words. "Get your things," he commanded. It's no use," she whispered, her voice a dead, hollow thing. She held up the broken music box, as if it were proof. "You see? It doesn't matter. The jury, the judge, it doesn't matter. They'll never stop. They'll never stop hating me." This was the truth she had always known. The trial was a lie. The rock was the truth. She was ruined. She was hated. "They'll never stop," she choked, a dry, tearless sob. I'm broken." Eli looked at her, at this woman he had pulled from the storm, this woman he had stood for. He looked at her, huddled on the floor, giving up, and his patience, his deep, mountainous silence, finally broke. "Let 'em," he growled. The word was so sharp, so unexpected, it was like a slap. She looked up, her eyes wide, her mouth open. "Let 'em hate," he said. He reached down, not to coddle her, not to soothe her. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard, and hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, and he held her up. He was shaking. She realized, not with fear, with rage. "You're listening to the wrong voices, girl," he said, his voice low and fierce, his face close to hers. "You've been listening to them your whole life, to Hobbs, to Silas, to them." He jerked his head toward the broken window. "They don't get to decide." He gave her a small, hard shake. "Not the judge, not your husband, not a town full of drunks." He kicked the rock, sending it scraping across the floor. "They don't get to decide your worth." He looked at her, his eyes burning into hers, willing her to understand. "I decide. You decide. Now. We're leaving." He did not ask. He did not wait. He grabbed her shawl from the floor, shoved her small bundle into her hands, and grabbed her wool blanket. He kept his rifle in the crook of his arm, his cane in his hand, and steered her, his hand on her back, out the door. He did not take her down the front stairs. He took her down a dark, rickety set of back stairs that led into a muddy alley. The sounds from the saloon were a distant, angry din. His horse was there, tethered to a rain barrel, and beside it was a solid-looking brown mare, saddled and ready. "You ride?" he asked, his voice already back to its normal, rough monotone. She nodded, dazed. "Good." He did not pause. He put his rifle in its scabbard. Then, with a strength that belied his limp, he put his hands on her waist and lifted her onto the mare's saddle. He mounted his own horse, a pained grunt escaping him as he swung his bad leg over. He took the mare's reins. He did not look back at the town. He did not wait for the judge's deadline or for the sunup. He kicked his horse, and they moved. A two-person exodus out of the alley. They rode, under the cover of a high, thin moon, out of the town and back toward the high, cold, quiet safety of the mountains. The cabin was a sanctuary. When they arrived, the sun was just beginning to touch the peaks with gray light. Eli dismounted, his legs stiff, and helped her down. She was so exhausted she nearly fell. He pushed the cabin door open. It was as they had left it, quiet, safe. "You're safe here," he said. He unrolled his bedroll, put it by the hearth, and pointed. "Sleep." She did. The days that followed were not a return to the old routine. They were not two wounded animals hiding from a storm. They were two people, in the bright, clear air of early summer, beginning to build. The fear, the trembling, slowly left Clara. The sound of the breaking glass faded. She began to exist. She found a box packed tightly in the high rafters, full of another woman's things. Sarah's. She looked at Eli, a silent question. He just nodded, his face tight, and walked outside. Clara took the things out. Linens, bleached white by a sun from years ago. 2 simple, faded cotton dresses, a set of thick muslin curtains. She washed them. She hung them on a line Eli strung between 2 pines. The cabin, for the first time, smelled of lye soap and sunshine. She mended the curtains, her stitches small and even. She hung them over the 2 windows. The harsh, square light softened. The cabin, once a rough, masculine shelter, began to feel like a home. She took one of the dresses. It was a simple, pale blue. It fit, as if it had been waiting for her, while she reclaimed the inside. Eli reclaimed the outside. He was not just checking traps. He was planting. He found a patch of earth near the porch, the last place the snow had melted, the first to get the morning sun. He took his shovel, and despite his leg, he turned the soil. The work was slow, painful. Clara came out. She did not ask. She just knelt, picking the rocks from the dark earth, piling them to one side. He worked the shovel. She worked the soil with her hands. They worked side by side in the quiet, breathing in the smell of new earth. He brought out a small leather pouch. "Beans," he said. He showed her how to poke a small hole with her finger, how deep to drop the seed. They planted 2 long rows. Their hands brushed in the dirt. This time, no one pulled away. The cabin was quiet, but it was a living quiet. They spoke. "Your leg," she said one evening, watching him rub his thigh. "It's worse, from the ride." "It'll pass," he grunted, his eyes on the fire. "You shouldn't have gone, Eli. You shouldn't have risked it." He stopped rubbing. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Yes," he said, his voice flat. "I should have." And she understood. He had not gone for her. He had gone for himself, for his own code. One morning, the bean sprouts were pushing through the soil, 2 perfect, bright green leaves. The curtains were up. A pot of wildflowers she had picked was on the small table. Eli was on the porch, whittling, his face turned toward the sun. Clara came out. She had been mending the shirt he'd worn to the trial. She put it down. She walked over to him. He stopped whittling, his hands stilling, and looked up at her. In the clear morning light, she was not the creature he had pulled from the storm. Her hair was clean, tied back. Her face had color. The blue dress she wore made her eyes seem deeper. She was not a ghost. She was a woman. She knelt in front of him, on the rough porch steps. He tensed. "Clara." She did not speak. She reached out and took his hand, the left one, the scarred one, the one he always favored, the one he sometimes hid. He tried to pull it back, a reflex of old shame. She held it. She lifted his hand, her fingers warm against his puckered skin, and she pressed it, palm flat, to her chest, right over her heart, It was a slow, deliberate, terrifyingly intimate act. He froze, his breath catching. He could feel her heartbeat, steady and strong, against his damaged palm. "Eli," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. He saw no fear in them, not panic, not the desperate need of the girl in the storm. He saw calm, and he saw choice. "I still hurt," she said, her voice quiet but clear. In here." She kept his hand pressed to her heart. And on my shoulder." She did not flinch. The hurt doesn't just go away. The jury didn't fix it. The rock, it's still there, in my head. I still have nightmares." He watched her, his throat tight. "But I'm not broken." Her voice gained a new, low strength. "Not anymore. And I'm not offering myself because I'm ruined. I'm not giving away something that's spoiled." She took a shaky breath. "I want you to have all of me. Not just the pain, not just the shame. All of me, the part that planted beans, the part that mended the curtains, the part that is breathing right here." She held his hand tighter. "I am choosing this. I am choosing you." He searched her face. He saw the truth. It was a terrifying, beautiful, undeniable truth. He did not hesitate. He dropped the whittling knife. It clattered on the steps. His other hand, his good hand, came up. It was trembling. He laid it gently against her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized she'd shed. "Clara," he breathed, the name a prayer. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, chaste goodbye on the porch. It was slow. It was reverent. It was a man, starved for 3 years, finally coming home. It tasted of sun and salt and a profound, wordless acceptance. He broke the kiss, but only to stand, his bad legs shaking with the strain. He pulled her up with him. He did not ask. He did not need to. He bent, and with a low grunt, he lifted her into his arms. She was light. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He carried her inside, through the doorway she had once collapsed in, past the hearth she had wept at, and to his bunk, their bunk. He laid her down on the clean, sun-dried quilt. The new curtain softened the morning light, filling the cabin with a warm, dusty glow. Their lovemaking was a discovery. It was as slow as the season, as quiet as the mountain. It was a sacrament of wounds. He undressed her, and when he saw the brand on her shoulder, he did not flinch. He did not look away. He bent his head, and he pressed his lips to it. He kissed the scar, a slow, gentle press that was not about passion, but about honor. He kissed the old, faded scars on her feet. He kissed the faint yellow shadow of the bruise on her cheek. She, in turn, undressed him. She saw the ropey, puckered skin on his neck, the ruined landscape of his hand. She held his scarred hand to her mouth, and she kissed each damaged knuckle. She kissed the scar by his ear. They came together not in a clash, but in a yielding. It was silent. The cabin was filled only with the sound of their breathing, of skin against linen. The only word spoken was her name, for his, whispered over and over into his shoulder as he held her. "Eli, Eli, Eli." It was not a plea. It was a claiming. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the summer morning air warm on their skin. The world was quiet. Clara reached over the side of the bunk. Her small bundle was on the floor. She drew out the broken music box. She sat up. The quilt pooled around her waist, and she turned the key. It was stiff. It resisted, but then a small, tinny sound, a few notes, faint and clear, of a simple tune. It played for a moment, then stopped, then played again, broken, but still music. They lay, listening to the imperfect song. From outside, the world began to change. The air in the cabin grew heavy, the light dimming, a low rumble, miles away. vibrated through the floor. A summer storm was brewing. Clara looked at the window, where the sky was darkening. She did not flinch. She did not tremble. A soft, low laugh escaped her throat. Eli, lying beside her, his scarred hand resting on her hip, looked at her. "What?" She turned in his arms, settling her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. The thunder rumbled again, closer. "God's still angry at me," she whispered, a small smile on her lips. Eli pulled her close, his arm tightened around her, a solid, warm, living wall. He kissed the top of her head. "Let him be," he growled, his voice a deep, sure comfort against her ear, safer than any roof, stronger than any storm. "Let him be." The summer wildflowers did not just bloom. They rioted. They spilled down the mountain in waves of blue lupine and fiery Indian paintbrush, as if the earth, long starved, was finally feasting. The world, which had been gray and roaring, was now green and humming. Life in the cabin settled into a rhythm, marked not by the clock, but by the sun and the small, steady sounds of living. The thud of Eli's axe at the woodpile, a sound that no longer made her flinch. The scrape of her own knife, chopping carrots and potatoes from their small, hard-won garden, the hiss of steam from the kettle, the sigh of the wind through the tall pines. They were, in their quiet way, rebuilding. Eli mended the fence on the north side, replacing the winter-rotted posts. His limp was a constant, a part of him, but the way he moved was different. He was no longer a man just enduring. He was a man working. He was tending to a life. Clara baked bread. She found a stash of sourdough starter, dry and dormant in a small crock, left over from Sarah. She had brought it back to life with flour and water, and now, twice a week, the cabin filled with the sharp, warm, honest smell of baking bread. She was mending the world from the inside out. The wounds, of course, were still there. They had only scarred over. The nightmares did not vanish. They were a tax she still had to pay. She would wake, gasping, her heart a cold hammer, the smell of whiskey and burning flesh in her nostrils. She would be sitting bolt upright, her hands clenched, the scream silent in her throat. But she was not alone. In the old days, she would have woken in the dark, in her cold corner, and Eli would have been a silent, awake shape in his chair, a man guarding a tomb. Now, she woke in their bed, and Eli would be there. He would not speak. He would not ask about the dream. He would just move, his body a solid, warm reality in the dark. His scarred hand would find hers. His other arm would pull her down, tucking her head against his chest, holding her. He would just hold her until her breathing slowed, until her heart stopped fighting his, until the smell of pine and wood smoke and him chased the phantoms away. He was her anchor. He kept her from floating away on that dark river. He, too, was healing. His limp was permanent, a constant reminder of the fire. But the grim, hollow look in his eyes was fading. It had been replaced by focus. He watched the bean plants grow. He watched his new axe handle take shape. One afternoon, she was trying to lift a heavy water barrel onto the small porch stand. She was struggling, her feet slipping in the mud. He came up behind her, not saying a word, and took the weight. As he set it down, a small, gray kitten that had been hiding in the woodpile darted out, startled, and fell over its own clumsy feet. A sound rumbled from Eli's chest. It was not a cough. It was not a grunt. It was a short, rough, unused sound, a laugh. Clara stared at him. He looked at her, his eyes surprised by the sound his own body had made. A slow, faint smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen it. It changed his entire face, pulling at the scars, softening the granite. Clara felt her own lips mirror him. She smiled back. It was a small thing, a single moment, but it was everything. One day in late summer, a man on a mule rode up the pass. He was old, his face like dried leather, his clothes worn thin, but his eyes were bright. He was a circuit preacher, a man who carried the word of God in his saddlebags to the forgotten corners of the mountains. He shared their supper of rabbit stew and fresh bread, and he spoke of floods and harvests and new babies in the valley. Clara listened, her hands quiet in her lap. When the meal was done, she spoke, her voice low but clear. "Preacher." The old man looked at her. Eli, who had been cleaning his rifle, stopped. I want to be baptized," Clara said. The preacher looked at her, his gaze kind. He did not ask what sins she carried. He had seen enough of the world to know that most folks were carrying things that were not their own. "The water's cold, child." "I do not mind," she said. Eli put the rifle down. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. It is not for God," she tried to explain, her words fumbling. Not in that way. It is for me. I want to wash away what was done. I want to stand up out of the water and just be. Clara, not what they made me, not the brand, not the shame. I want to be clean. For me." Eli stood up. He nodded at the preacher. "The river's low this time of year. There is a pool just past the aspen grove. It is deep enough." They walked, the three of them, in the golden late afternoon light. The river was a cold, clear rush over smooth stones. The preacher waded in, his trousers rolled up, and found his footing. Clara took a breath. She was wearing the simple blue dress, the one that had belonged to Sarah. She looked at Eli. He stood on the bank, a silent, solid witness. "Come with me," she whispered, holding out her hand. "Please." He did not hesitate. He did not care about the water, or the preacher. He limped into the freezing current, his cane sinking into the mud. He took her hand. His grip was strong. She walked out to the preacher. Eli stood beside her, waist deep in the rushing water, his hand holding hers. "Clara," the preacher said, his voice loud over the sound of the river. "Do you seek a new life in the eyes of God and your own heart?" "I do," she said, her voice shaking from the cold, but not from fear. "Then I baptize you." He guided her backward. Eli did not let go of her hand. He held it as she went under, the icy water a sudden, shocking, total silence. It closed over her head, and for one suspended second, she was weightless. She was nothing. Then the preacher pulled her up. She burst out of the water, gasping, the sun blinding in her eyes. The water streamed from her hair, from her dress. She was freezing, and she was alive. She was breathing. She looked at Eli. He was still holding her hand. He had not let go. The preacher said his words, but Clara did not hear him. She just looked at the man who stood beside her, his scarred hand in hers, and knew she was not just washed. She was anchored. Time smoothed the edges of her story in town. The world moved on. New gossip, new scandals, new troubles arrived with every stagecoach. Hobbs, her husband, had left town in disgrace, drifting west. The saloon had a new girl. A cattle rustler was caught and hanged. Silas Croft, lying in his bed, unable to speak or walk, was forgotten. He was just old, sad news. Clara's life, which had been a fire that threatened to burn the town down, was now just a cold ember. People forgot. Until the day Silas Croft died. It happened in the fall. The aspen leaves had turned a brilliant, trembling gold. The news came, as it always did, from town. Martha Bell, the sheriff's wife, had ridden up the mountain. A rare visit. She and Clara had become something, not quite friends, but allies. Clara was writing a letter for her, to her sister back in Ohio. Clara's hand, steady and clean, formed the letters. Tell Tell her the baby is well, Martha said, her eyes on the fire. And tell her that Mr. Croft, the one from the trial, he passed this morning. The infection, it finally took him. Clara's hand stopped. The pen, held in her fingers, bled a small, dark pool of ink onto the page. He is dead? Yes, child, Martha said, her voice gentle. It is over, truly. But it was not. Eli was out, checking a trapline on the far ridge. Clara was alone, hanging laundry on the line. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and the coming winter. The silence was vast. She heard the horse. It was coming too fast. She turned, her heart a cold stone in her chest. He was not a stranger. He looked like Silas, the same tall, gaunt frame, the same dead-looking eyes, but this man was younger, his face raw with grief and cheap whiskey. He pulled his horse to a jarring stop, ruining the bean plants, and he had a long-barreled shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. You! He spat. His voice was a raw, wet sound of hate. You're her, the one who killed my brother. I did not. He died, the man screamed, his voice cracking. He died this morning, from what you did to him, from that hole you put in him. He was shaking, drunk and wild with a grief that had curdled into vengeance. I'm Jedediah Croft, and I come to balance the books. He raised the shotgun. Clara did not run. She did not scream. She just froze. The blast was deafening. It echoed off the mountainside. But she was not hit. Eli? He had come from the trees, silent as a shadow. He had been on his way home. He had seen. He had not waited. He had thrown himself at her. A low, animal growl ripping from his throat. He tackled her, pushing her to the ground, behind the small stone wall of the garden. He took the blast. The shotgun pellets tore through the thick wool of his coat, into his left shoulder. He roared. It was a sound of pure, agonized rage. He collapsed on top of her, his body a dead weight. Eli! She screamed. Jed Croft was fumbling, trying to reload. He was cursing, his hands shaking. Clara shoved Eli off her. Blood! There was so much blood, a dark, hot stain spreading across his back. He was groaning, his teeth gritted. She saw the world in a new, cold, sharp light. This would not happen. She had not come this far, been pulled from the mud and the water, to have it end here. Eli's rifle. It was leaning against the cabin wall, where he always left it. She scrambled, on her hands and knees, keeping low. I see you, Jed yelled, ramming the new shells home. I'll finish you both. She reached the rifle. Her hands were steady. She knew this weapon. Eli had taught her. Squeeze, he had said. Do not pull. Breathe out. Be the quiet. She rose, the heavy stock of the rifle pressed to her own shoulder. Jed raised his shotgun. He was faster, but he was drunk. She was not. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her, the sound a clean, sharp crack. It was not the messy roar of the shotgun. It was a single, true note. Jed screamed. The shotgun flew from his hands as he clutched his right arm. He had not been hit in the chest. She had aimed for his weapon, for his arm. She had aimed to stop him. He stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He looked at his bleeding arm, at the woman with the rifle, at the fallen man, the whiskey, the rage. It all drained out of him, leaving a pale, terrified man. He scrambled for his horse's reins, hauled himself into the saddle, and fled, disappearing down the path he had come. Clara did not watch him go. She dropped the rifle and ran to Eli. He was on his side, his face pale as ash, his hand clamped to his shoulder. Blood was pulsing, thick and dark, between his fingers. Eli! She cried, skidding to her knees beside him. She ripped at her own dress. tearing a long strip of cloth. It is bad," he gritted, his body shuddering with shock. "No," she said, her voice fierce. "No, you are not leaving." She pressed the cloth to the wound, her hands covered in his blood. "You are not allowed." She put her arm under his back, trying to lift him. He was a dead weight. "You listen to me, Eli," she whispered, her voice a low, desperate command, her face close to his. "You do not get to leave me. You do not. I lost everything I ever had. My mother, my home, my name." She was sobbing now, hot, angry tears, but her hands were firm on the wound. You are the only thing," she choked. "The only thing I ever chose. You hear me? You are mine. You do not get to leave." He looked at her, his eyes clouding with pain, but he heard her. He saw her. He tried to nod. He survived. It was a long, terrible night. She got him inside, inch by agonizing inch, a trail of blood marking the path from the garden to their bed. She pulled the pellets out, one by one, with a knife heated in the fire, as he bit down on a strap of leather. She boiled water. She cleaned the wound. She stitched it shut with the same needle and thread she used to mend his shirts. His fever raged for 2 days. She did not sleep. She sat by the bed, bathing his face, forcing water between his cracked lips, and holding his scarred, restless hand. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear, and looked at her. "Clara," he whispered. She laid her head on his chest and wept. Autumn settled, the air turned crisp, and the leaves on the aspens fell, carpeting the mountain in gold. The first snows dusted the high peaks. Eli's shoulder healed, leaving a new map of scars that matched her own. They began to build. "This cabin," Eli said one morning, "is too small." Clara smiled. "It is." They worked side by side, he with his one good arm and his bad leg, and she with her steady strength. They cut the timber, dragged it, and notched it. They were building a new room, a space that was not just his or hers, but theirs. And they laughed. They laughed when a log rolled, when a nail bent, when she got mud on his nose. It was the easy, quiet laughter of 2 people who had earned their peace, and who knew, bone deep, what it had cost. As the walls went up, Clara found a new purpose. Martha Bell came back, and this time she brought Mary, the young woman from the church. "My sister," Mary said, her hands twisting. "Her husband, he drinks. He took her savings. She wants to leave him to go back to our parents. But she can't write. He reads all her letters." Clara looked at the young, frightened woman. She knew this story. We thought," Martha said, "that you could write it in words he would not understand, in a code." Clara took the pen, and she wrote. She wrote a letter to Mary's sister, a beautiful letter about the changing seasons, about the color of the leaves, about planting a new garden in a new place. But hidden in the words, in the language she and Eli had built, of storms and anchors and breathing, was a message. "Get out! Run! Come here! You will be safe!" She became a voice. The women who could not speak, the women who were trapped, who were beaten, who were silenced. They found their way up the mountain, and Clara wrote. She wrote letters for them, her hand, which had once been branded, now wielding a power that was quiet and clean and true. One night, the first great storm of winter arrived. The wind howled, the cabin, now with its new room, shuddered. Thunder, deep and low, shook the timbers. Clara woke. She was not in a cold corner. She was not on a cot in a dusty room. She was in their bed, in Eli's arms. His body was a warm, solid wall behind her, his arm draped over her waist. his scarred hand resting on her hip. The thunder cracked, a sound that had once been her terror. She did not flinch. She just lay there, listening to the storm, listening to the slow, steady sound of Eli's breathing. She whispered into the dark, her voice so low it was almost just a thought. "You still want all of me?" It was the old question, but it was different. It was not the desperate plea of the broken girl. It was not the reverent offering of the healing woman. It was a quiet, wondering question from the woman who lay here, safe. "You still want this? The nightmares, the scars, the fight, the past I carry?" He was awake. He had been awake, listening to her breathe. He pulled her closer, his hand tightening on her hip. He pressed his face into her hair, and his voice, a low, rough rumble against her ear, was the truest thing she had ever heard. "I only ever wanted you. Thank you for listening to this story from the From Wild West channel. We would love to connect with you, so please comment with where you are listening from, share your thoughts in English, and be sure to subscribe."